Naomi, we're finally making it happen.
It's been a long time coming, but we're here.
Well, you
Happy
are,
April.
yeah, happy April. We're recording just this after Easter. You are an extremely busy person. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to have you on, because you have so many interesting projects and different things you kind of have your hands in. So it's hard to track you down, but I'm glad I did. But before we get to all that, I just kind of want to ask, like, how are you doing? How are things generally in your life in this weird pandemic virtual world?
Thanks for asking, Ryan. And first of all, thanks for having me here. I'm a huge fan of your show and the stories that you're able to share through this platform. It's incredible. So, I send you a lot of messages about, oh my God, just listen to this episode, and it's um, the depth that you're able to get with people, like how deep you're able to get with people, and then also just share the reality of life is great to have a
Well, thank
platform like
you.
this.
Thank you.
Um, I've been really good. It's been a year or so and even prior to that, I was having a lot of conversations near the end of 2019 around how the speed at which we were producing and working and doing all of these things just wasn't working anymore.
Mm,
Um, and so my body was telling me a lot of things like slow down, take a break. And a couple months later, obviously, this happened and everything kind of shut down, and finally had time to rest and take things easy and not use so many things as distractions.
mm,
And instead just deepen my practice when it comes to yoga, meditation, my writing practice, doing more conversations because I have a podcast as well.
mm-hmm.
And it's been really good to just take a step back and reevaluate things. So yeah, I think we're having this conversation at a really interesting time. And so I'm happy to delve into anything that you want to talk about, creativity, purpose, all of it.
Yeah, and there's a lot to get to with you. But I do want to start on the podcast. We were talking earlier, as just getting to know each other and having general conversations about why we kind of got into podcasting and the things we're trying to share with people and audiences. And I think we both share a we relate to each other, and we're both trying to tell stories of people that you don't necessarily typically hear in the general population, in the news, media, like that type of stuff. It's stories that often go untold, but are very necessary to be told. The Power of Why. It's a very powerful name. Tell me about your podcast and what got you into it, and the story thus far of all these amazing conversations you've had with people.
Yeah. I had the idea in my head for about a year before I even recorded a conversation. I was in my last year of school, and I remember like first year, second year, there was this push. I was in business school. There was this push to network and meet with professionals and get involved on campus and blah, blah, blah. And so I did all of those things, and was pretty involved in student life. I went to Telfer School of Management at U of O. And through these programs, through these events, at these networking functions, I would meet with a lot of professionals. And for the ones that I was interested in learning more about them and their careers, what they're, a lot of winding paths, as
Mm.
you can imagine, even through your podcast. And so I would sit down with a lot of these professionals one on one and just talk about what it is that they do. And I noticed something distinct about the folks who could clearly articulate the why behind their work. Like it wasn't just a job that they would go to every day. It was something more meaningful than that. And I wanted to unravel those stories more than any of the other ones because they offered insights, and it wasn't necessarily from a perspective of, oh my gosh, I need to gather all of these advice from these quote unquote smart people. It was more so about fulfillment and really really using your strengths and your gifts per se, and being able to translate into something that could actually help other people, could, whether it's the betterment of, their lives, their livelihood, or increase the quality of people's lives, or just offer something to other people that hasn't necessarily been done in the marketplace before. And so I love those type of stories, the one. And
Mm,
so the idea for The Power of Why, that's kind of how it came about. And at the time I was reading Start With Why by Simon Sinek, if you've heard of
mm,
him.
mhm,
And so all of these purpose questions started like flooding in, and I'm like, what do I do with this information? And I would take a lot of these stories and then I would go and share it with my friends, but it was just through, like, I could only reach people that I knew, right? And I don't know, I guess a year later, I started thinking about how I could translate this into something and document it, right? It could live in the cloud somewhere. It could reach people that I don't even know about all across the world. And the first conversation, it was very small. Didn't think too much about it, didn't overcomplicate things. But I sat down with my friend, Rebecca McCormick, who a couple months before we graduated landed a consulting gig. And so I just wanted to talk. She's so smart, and she's, took a gap year, which is kind of unconventional. I
mhm,
think it's things are starting to change right now, but she took a gap year, which ended up translating to 5 years, and then went back to school. And so she was just very aware and conscious about the moves that she was making. And upon meeting her, I was just like, you move a little bit different in this world, and I want to hear like what your perspectives are and how you were able to really translate some of the things that you learned in school into a career that you are passionate about. And so we literally sat in her living room. I recorded on my cell phone,
mm.
nothing fancy, and that's kind of where things started back in 2017. Yeah.
And it just kind of ignited that flame. You heard the story, and it went from there. That's really cool. I have So you talk about purpose. That's something I'm very passionate about. But I'm wondering, in these conversations, when you're talking to some of the people you've had on, when you're identifying potential guests, are you looking for purpose like just in career? And I ask that because I'm fortunate. I've been able to find some purpose in my career, but not all the time. And it doesn't always fill the void of the things I want to accomplish. So I go off and I create my own things. I started the podcast, whether it's the mental health advocacy that I do,
Yeah. Hmm.
all that stuff. I really seek purpose. And if I'm not having it fulfilled in one place, I will go try to find it in another place. So when you're talking about with these people, is it about finding that purpose in their career, or is it the purpose in general? Because I think, we all want to do something with our lives that's meaningful, that we create good work. But I I'm wondering about the connection with that being in the career, or if it's like volunteerism or activism or other things outside of your job.
That's a really good question. And I guess the examples that I've shared just in the first couple minutes probably did translate nicely to career, but I'm of the belief that your purpose is not it's not
Mhm.
attached to a job or an opportunity. And as you mentioned, like you would go find it in other places. And Mm, I don't know if I agree that it's something that you find and something that you search for, something that you seek. I truly believe it's something that you can create, and it doesn't need to sit in a certain section of your life really neatly and in a nice box. I think you can create, like, meaning is something that's constructed. It's something that you can define for yourself. And so when I'm talking about purpose, or back to your question around finding guests that align with the overall theme of the show, no, it doesn't stop and start at purpose, or start and stop at at a career, I should say. It's more about like having folks who have a strong sense of controlling their lives. And I know there's a lot that you can't control, but it's more about they've found a way to do what it is that they want when they want with the people that they want. And I think that there are different variables um, that contribute to making people feel happy in their lives or feel fulfilled or have this sense of purpose. And I think you can create it in any avenue of your life for sure. And so the guests, they come from all walks. Like some of them are entrepreneurs, others are activists, others have 9-to-5 jobs, others find it through, as you mentioned, volunteerism. And you know what I'm going to start to do more often is just have my friends on as well, because I don't think you necessarily need to be building something extravagant for your story to matter. And I think, yeah, I know that everyone has something to share. I know that everyone, as you mentioned, most people want to figure out how it is that they're able to contribute in this world. And so that comes in various shapes and forms. And I'm interested in capturing the stories that, as you mentioned earlier, that we aren't often hearing about, right? The people that are kind of building quietly, maybe they're not picked up by media and news outlets as often. Because I think even in Ottawa, I feel like we're drawing on the same people always for opportunities. And I'm like, where are the others? There have to be. There are others. We just don't know about them yet. And so, yeah, you could say that I'm a little on a hunt for sure to find these people.
Yeah, I love that. Some of the best conversations I've had on this show was with maybe I like with my friends, but also people like who I like yourself. Like we kind of know each other, but we've never met in real life. We've just kind of connected, but you
Right.
already have that familiarity, and so you can go a little bit deeper or get a little bit more real or have a more intimate connection because you know each other, and at least if I ask a question, okay, well, I know Ryan's not being malicious or he's not trying to do this. He's like an honest understanding. Or whereas if you
Right.
interview someone who's high profile, like that always makes me nervous. I'm like, oh my God, I do not want to screw up. I don't want to say something dumb. So I always say, like, before we start recording with people, I'm always like, listen, if I say something stupid and ask a question you don't like, let's just laugh it off. Don't just be like, oh, that's a story for another time. Ha 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 ha. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you have to be a little bit more careful. Whereas you can have a much more real conversation with your friends. Um, so, obviously, if you were involved in university, like, you seem like a very like high achieving person. What, where have your philosophies changed, if so, or maybe even like you already knew something, but then you had a guest on, or you had one of these conversations, and you just like were like, okay, now I'm doubling down on it. Like, what were these like big takeaways? There's probably many like I've had, but maybe a couple that where you just had a conversation, they said something, and you're just like that light bulb moment. You're just like, here we go, like that's it, and then you just take that and accelerate that in your own life. What were some of those lessons?
There are a lot of lessons, and some of them also weren't said explicitly, but you'll notice a pattern like after listening to all of these stories. And I would say the pattern that I noticed from story to story, even though it wasn't like explicitly stated, was that small steps move the needle. Small things move the needle. And I think for me growing up, there was pressure to do things perfectly and to do well in school and to get the best marks and all of these things that can sometimes cripple you from just starting and getting work out there, because it's not up to the standard that is expected of me, right? And so I think from that perspective, a couple of years ago, I was able to just let go of this. And obviously, I'm still working on it, but let go of this idea that everything that you put out needs to be perfect and just get started, right? And even in me describing the origin story of the podcast, it wasn't at the same level or output that it is today. And if I wanted it to be, I wouldn't have started 3 years ago. I probably would have started a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for me, really understanding that the first step is not for it to be great, it is just to put something out there. And then once you have things out there, then you can start to improve, right? You can't improve something that doesn't exist. So for me, it was just about understanding if you do have this ideal of what it can look like, or a quote unquote big vision, that don't let that big vision cripple you from just starting today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and all of these things add up. Like, me looking back, we really underestimate what we can do in a couple years, right? But we overestimate what we can do in maybe a month. So we have these long to-do lists. I need to do X, Y, and Z, and we can go overboard with that. But if you're able to take something that you want to do within a 1 year or 2 year time frame and just say, okay, what does that, for that to be possible, what do I need to do this month? What do I need to do this quarter? You know what I mean? And so that was, I would think that, yeah, I would say that that was the biggest pattern that I noticed amongst all these stories, is that they didn't let their big vision cripple them from just getting started. And yeah, I mean, you hear a lot the whole just start, just do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think from learning from these individuals, it's not as laissez-faire as it may look when you only have social media or some of these social apps show you that people make it look easy.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, I would say the far majority of them, make it look really easy. But in having these one-on-one conversations and really actually like diving in and reading about their stories, I'm like, this is strategic. Like, their moves are strategic. The steps that they make are intentional, and none of this just happens by accident, right? So I think those two big patterns that I noticed really run in parallel, of just like breaking down whatever your big vision is, but also each step, no matter how small, matters for the greater picture, even if it's not really clear for you in that particular moment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. I don't know why I thought all of, like, oh, they just got lucky. No, there are different, like, there are articles out there if you're interested on the 4 different types of luck. And so
Hmm.
one of them, I can't remember all 4 of them, but one of them is the idea, and it probably will resonate for a lot of folks listening, the idea that if you are in movement, luckier things will happen to you. Like, opportunities will come that wouldn't have been able to find you had you just been, sitting down and not really, getting started on your dreams. So yeah, it's been really good. The patterns that I've noticed have been really powerful for sure.
That really resonates with me a lot, actually, and that, because I've always been a person, I'm like, just do it. Like, I decided to make this podcast uh one evening, and then the next day I just went and made it. I just went in and I made a website, got a logo on Wix. I just recorded myself talking for 40 minutes about what I wanted the podcast to be, and I found out how
Yeah.
to upload it. And like, and I'm just like, hey, now I have a podcast, here we go. And then you just kind of figure everything out. From like, the way I did it is just figure everything out along the way. I'm like, okay, well, how do I do this? Okay, Google, like, okay. And then what's working, what's not working. Okay, this way is not really working anymore. This platform doesn't really work. But so many people, I think, around our age, and it was so interesting that you brought up, kind of your experience growing up about that need of good grades, high expectations, and that need to that deep-seated feeling that you need to be perfect. Because I find a lot of
Yeah.
people will think about a business like, oh, I really want to do this, but they strategize it to death, they overthink it, and then they're just like, people become crippled by this thing of like,
Yeah.
I can't, or you're right, like, that need of, well, it won't be perfect when I launch, and that's unacceptable. So a lot of people just never end up finding it or doing it because they're scared of what could happen once they do, I guess, and failure. Um, And whereas like I'm like almost like the total opposite. I'm just like, figure it out, and if it fails, then move on. But really, especially with podcasting, like the number one thing is just being consistent, just
Right.
continually putting out episodes. And I think that can translate to, whatever people are trying to do, whether it's start a business or become, active in some sort of community, whatever their mission is. It's
Mhm.
just like, just do it. Don't. And I know you just said like people are just like, just do it. It's not that simple, but it's like, it's almost like you have
It
to.
can be. It
Yeah,
can
like
be.
I don't know, like something just went like this. I'm like, I want to do it, and then like go, and then and just be consistent about it. I think that's like, to me, that's like the biggest thing to get started on your goal.
I agree. And sometimes also you're looking like when you're just getting started in a specific avenue and you have, I don't really have role models, but if you're looking at folks as examples for what your thing can look like, um, then you're like, wow, mine doesn't look like that right now. But you're looking at someone's step 20, right? And
Yeah.
comparing that to your step one. And that can be tricky. That can be tricky. That can be difficult. That could, like, self-doubt is so real. I was just having a conversation with my friend who is working on something right now, and those those ideas, those narratives start coming back around. Am I crazy for wanting to do this thing? Um, what if this is just ridiculous? I should just give up. Like, all that self doubt, narratives and statements start coming up for you. And honestly, that's part of it. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
part of the process. That's not something that you can override. That's not a step that you can skip. In fact, it's going to come up multiple times as you are doing this thing. Um, and plus, like, if you didn't have those thoughts and it was easy, then everyone would be doing it. Everyone would be doing it.
Yeah, imposter syndrome is a real thing. I get it. I'm sure, I don't know if you get it, but yeah, you always question, I think that's just human nature. We question our choices, and it's really easy to look back in hindsight, and also look ahead in the future. It's like the future is scary, and it's really easy to focus on mistakes and things that you made that maybe didn't work out, or you wish you did a different way in the past. But really,
Yeah.
it's living in the present and just soaking in every moment. And you're right, like having that strategy. There was a quote I heard a couple months ago, which I loved, and it was like, if you look at yourself and your life in 5 years, is what you're doing, would you be doing the same thing? And if you are, that means you're living a life of purpose and value, because you're
Mm,
doing all the things that you want to do, because in 5 years you'd still be doing them. And if you wouldn't be doing them in 5 years, is it worth, and I'm not talking about like career, like kind of trajectories. I'm just talking about, family values, your
mm,
friendships, your relationships, all those different things. Like if you can't see yourself in 5 years doing it, like, you're not living a life of purpose. And I think, to me, that opened my eyes a lot. I'm like, okay, is everything I'm doing contributing to the
mm.
life I want to live? And if it's not, do I cut it out? And some things I've had to cut out, some people I've had to cut out,
Ooh.
because
Ryan said it.
yeah, well, I
Only
mean,
quality people. Oh my
as
goodness. That's a
as
whole other
yeah,
conversation.
as much as I love people, I get a lot of energy from people. I want to help people. Um, and it's not to say that I'm never talking to you again, goodbye, but it's redefining that relationship you have with them, because some people, it's like, oh, I want to start a podcast. Oh, that's dumb. Why would you do that? It's like, okay, well, maybe, because people can bring you down just as much as yourself and your own self-doubt, you know?
Yep, that's why setting boundaries are really important. Um, and just being really clear about where it is that you're going. The people who are also like building with intention and
Mhm.
see life from the same perspective that you do. It's so interesting that you mentioned this, because in December, so we're recording this in April, in December of 2020, I started working with my mentor. And this was
Mm.
someone that I've been watching for a couple years. I met her at an event. At this point, it's probably 3 years ago, 2, 3 years ago. And she was on a panel of 5 or so folks. And I find panels to be quite interesting in that oftentimes you'll have people kind of saying the same thing just to fit in as part of
Mhm.
this narrative. And she was the only one that for certain questions where it just didn't align, she was like, yeah, that's just not my truth. And everyone was kind of like a parrot almost. And I'm like, that's so refreshing. I don't know. I just remember storing that in my memory. And she's just so diligent, so confident, so intentional about being of service to other people. And when she's saying yes to these kinds of opportunities, it's not to further her brand or, be amongst this group of people. She's really intentional about coming prepared with stories that could um, help the audience, and the people tuning in to maybe incorporate that, change it a little bit, and then implement it in their own life. And so she's incredible. I have so many great things to say about her. But one of the first exercises that she had me do was look at the 6 or 7 different areas of my life, all the way from friendship, relationships, career, spirituality, money, um, everything. There's 6 or 7 personal development, 6 or 7 different categories, and get really clear on how you wanted your life to look in all of these areas, all the way down to describing what it feels like to, for example, have friendships um, that uplift and nourish and are about supporting one another when it comes to money, experiencing or not really having to think about um, I think a lot of people when it comes to money, not all folks, but there's this level of friction and anxiety around finances. You're
As I
raising your
raise my
hand.
hand, that's me.
And I think there's this really interesting opportunity to reimagine what your relationship to finances can even begin to look like, right? And in ways that make conversations about money way more delightful and way more empowering. And so the level of detail that you're able to go through in all of these avenues to write down, this is my relationship with money. It flows in abundance. I have this. I have agency in my life. All of these things, right? That money can offer you. And just get really clear about what things feel like in your life, what your career feels like, what spirituality feels like for you. And then write down very clear objectives. You call them SMART goals that are time bound, that really describe the resources that you need to make this vision happen. And I sat down, and I think it took me about 4 hours to go through each of these areas of my life. But coming out of that exercise, it was, when shiny objects or different opportunities come on your plate, you're really in that moment able to see, does this align with the greater thing that I'm hoping to
Mhm.
do? And if it doesn't, say no. It is not
Mm.
contributing. It's actually wasting your time. It's a distraction. Um, and it's helped me remove ego from a lot of the things that I've been working on. And I don't know, it's helped me so much, Ryan, that I can't even describe it in ways that I feel so free in my creativity. I feel so free in what I am working towards and just my life in general, and how simple things can really be
Mm.
for me, for myself. That's what I value, for me to be happy. Um, that it isn't necessarily about status and fame and all of these things that as a young person growing up you think you want. And so I think, just having time for yourself to clearly, to gain clarity in these different areas is really powerful, like self-insight. And so I kind of touched on it at the beginning around, now we have the kind of time, and sure, we have distractions. I think we have fewer distractions right now. And it's really asking yourself, what do you want? Like, what do you want
Mhm.
to create? What do you want out of this life? How do you want to show up every single day? Um, what does success look like for you? These are all things that think you can only get to when you carve out time to be on your own without all of these inputs, all of the like social media is one example, but it's also like YouTube videos that
Mhm.
I know I can go on spirals in, and you get all these ideas of how you should be living your life. But these are all ideas that are not necessarily yours, but they can be confused as your own opinions, right?
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that was one exercise that I love sharing with people just because it has helped me so much. And it was, I did it in 4 hours or so.
Mm.
So yeah.
The thing I love about you sharing that with me and with people listening is the brightness, the energy, the smile that came from you when you were describing it. Like, you know, to me, just not even I like obviously listening, but just watching you explain it, I'm like, I can
Mm,
see how much like it means to you and how you know what I mean, how much it's affected you. Because just like it's almost like talking about like being swept off your feet by Prince Charming or whatever, you know what I mean, but like kind of that same like just kind of like this blissful happiness type attitude.
yeah.
And anyway, that's I really love that. And I don't know if you share the same view on it, but I've had that conversation that which of what you were describing, not quite in that depth where I've written it down, but there's been different points in my life where if I've had to sit with myself and truly evaluate where I want to go in life. I did it when I was 21, after I went through the darkest part of my life and decided where I wanted to go. I did it a
Hmm.
couple of years ago after a real trying time at work. And I did it again in this pandemic. And, sitting with myself and being forced to isolate without people around. I mean, yeah, you're right. Like I could sit on TikTok all day. I could sit and listen to podcasts. I can do all that. But it's really taking that time to find out almost in a sense of like who you are, like and who you want to be, what makes you happy. And that's something I took across from last year is this quote that was just like find what makes you happy and then do more of it and do it unapologetically, as long as
Mm.
it's obviously not hurting people, but if you're an asshole, but with if you have good intention. And I use the example is I was never into musicals, but I watched The Greatest Showman and I swear to God that thing changed my life. Like the music, like me
I learned the
singing.
dance.
Yeah, yeah, I can do it too. But it was just like I just felt this freeness of like I don't care if I want to walk
Yeah.
down the road and sing a song and like do a little dance and people are watching me. I'm like, I don't care. Like I'm so happy. I'm so free. And I don't know, like I think this is a conversation you can and an exercise you can continuously go back on and reevaluate and
Oh, for sure.
adapt. You know what I mean? And I think that's like an amazing opportunity that people don't take advantage of.
I think you hit it on the nail. It's a living document. It's not something that
Mm,
you write once, fill out all of these boxes, and then you're done with it. It's something that you refer back to, that you go in and edit. After, it's funny that you mentioned that because I did my first iteration in December 2020. And then at the end of March, so literally 2 weeks ago, I went back and actually like deleted a lot of things and rewrote it
oh,
because I've I've hit a lot of those quote unquote goals, and some of the things I just didn't have any interest in anymore. But I, found out about this whole host of other things that could further my vision. And yeah, I definitely think it's a living document. I've actually I'm in the midst of printing it out. And then I don't know if you're into like manifestation and that whole practice. Are you into that? Because I can
I'm
kind of.
neither there or against, I guess you could say. I know about it. It's not something I've ever like truly like looked into to practice.
Mm. I've had I'm like showing up as me right now.
Please, that's what I
Many
love.
instances. I've had many instances where I said something was going to happen and it happened within a matter of weeks. And I think it was honestly because I wrote it down and because I really changed my story around what was possible. And there's a speaker. He used to be a comedian. Now he incorporates comedy into kind of like personal development. His name is Kyle Cease, literally one of my favorite people.
Mm.
And he talks about how our stories and our narratives and our beliefs about ourselves and our own lives actually impact the course of our future and how things play out. And he was describing how if you have a narrative in your head or a belief that you are someone who makes $20,000 a year and you have an opportunity to make more, or if you win the lottery, for example, and this rush of money or financial abundance in this space comes to you, immediately you will reject it because it doesn't align with your current belief system.
Mm.
And even if you're struggling, right? And even if you're in pain, even if you are suffering, if it doesn't align for what you believe is true about your perspective or your beliefs or the way that you see life, then it cannot exist
Mm.
in your space. Um, so immediately after you receive like a bonus, for example, like your car will break down, and so like that money as fast as it came in, it left.
Right.
And this is so wild. And so I'll give you a tangible example for what happened with me. I, for a very long time, saw my podcast as a hobby, a very long time, for 3 years. Like I started it in 2017. And in 2020, I wrote down what I wanted this podcast to be, with clear things that I could measure. Like it wasn't just, oh, I want my podcast to reach more people. It was like, how many people? It was, how consistent do I want to be? It was, specifically do I want? Who do I want to reach? What message do I want to share? How much money do I want to make from the podcast? And I wrote it down in that exercise that I shared with you earlier. I even hired a designer to help me with my branding, just to like elevate it so that it aligns with the value that I know that I'm delivering through these shows. And I kid you not, 2 weeks later, I get an email from an organization in Ottawa who I love. I won't name them here, but maybe you can share the link in the description. And I had been in conversation with them over the past year, but nothing like this has ever surfaced. And they were doing a campaign for March. And they said, hey, we're trying out something new. We want to do a podcast series with, women in Ottawa who are doing great work. And we want you to be our host, our podcast host, like a partnership. They wanted to do a podcast partnership series. And I'm like, what? The fact that I was able to get proof in that short period of time, really, I'm telling you, if I didn't do that exercise, that wouldn't have happened. I know that wouldn't have aligned with me because I was not in a position where I saw my podcast as at that level, right? If it was just a hobby, then only hobby things would be attracted to, where this was going. And it like 5x'd my income goals for the year with just this one podcast deal. It aligned in messaging the way that like I couldn't have planned it better. And when I look back on the past 3 years, it's pretty incredible, like what you're able to create just from an idea, And if when you're starting something, for me, I did not even imagine all of these things, right? But then as you continue to be in movement and you maybe have new eyes around what's possible for you and what's possible with this thing that you've created, then you can start to raise some of those ceilings, right? You can start to raise some of those goals that you have. You can start to dream bigger. But if you did not get in motion in the first place, you wouldn't have been like, I wouldn't have been able to see all of these things that were there waiting for me. And so even folks, like if you don't really believe that manifestation is a thing or is possible, there is something to be said about writing down and understanding what it is that you want. Otherwise, wherever the wind blows, it's like, okay, today I'm over here, today I'm over here. But do you see the path that is in front of you? Do you see what is possible for you to create? And I think it starts with you believing that this is possible, and really getting clear about what it is that you want.
It's a lot to take in and a lot to reflect on, but I really love that, the way you phrased that and you put that all together. And I'm wondering now in my own personal life, I mean, I have developed pillars that I live my life by. And people always ask me how, like, I get opportunities to like moderate events now and to jump on Instagram lives and do interview, blah, blah, all that different stuff. And sometimes
Yeah, you do.
I'm like, I don't know. Like, I just do what I do, and people ask me to do things. And if it fits what I'm trying to do, I just say yes, whether there's money attached or not, whether it's big, whether it's small. If it fits into my life of trying to create a healthier space for people, and particularly young men, to talk about mental health and healthy expression and living life with respect and all those different things, if it fits into that narrative of what I'm trying to do, like, I say yes. And then the more I kind of say yes, the more opportunities kind of arise. So I don't know if that's a form of manifestation, because I've never like physically was like I want to like this in a book, but in my mind I'm like, okay, this is how I'm going to move forward in my life. This is what I want to do. This is what I'm passionate about. This can change lives, and I know it can because it changed my life. And the more I go about it, just the more opportunities come. So like, I don't know, is that like a form of me sort of manifesting it, or is,
You're walking in your purpose, Ryan, and you've defined how you want to show up in this life. And when people see you walking in that purpose, they're like, let's figure out ways to work with each other. You know what I mean? Like collaboration is almost inevitable at that point. And so you've defined those pillars. You've defined the impact that you're trying to have, that you are having. And it started with you, right? Like it started with, you mentioned that you changed your life first. And there are so many different ways of articulating it. And to hear that you've put that focus and that intention in doing that, even if you didn't write it down, I think that's just as powerful. Like you need to find out what works best for you and the way that you work and the way that you want to show up. Yeah, that's really powerful. I love that.
How do you remain productive and so creative and have all these avenues? Because the more I take on, whether that's with mental health, with podcasting, and especially at work, I have a very busy, involved job where I'm expected to come up with a lot of ideas and a lot of content, a lot of different types, whether it's social, written, all that market, all that stuff. I find sometimes in some areas it might lack, especially if that, like something at work where I'm not quite as passionate about, but I still have to do. It's harder to generate ideas. So you do a lot of stuff. You have your podcast, you have your full-time job, you work with with Next Gen, which I was able to attend an event. Oh my God, that was like October. Where is life? But you have a lot of different projects where, a lot of your brain and a lot of your time and a lot of your personal investment is required. So how do you manage your life in a way where you can still live happy, healthy, time for exercise, like you said about yoga and meditation, but also remain creative? Because that's the biggest thing. It's one thing to do a whole bunch of things, but it's a whole other thing to do a whole bunch of things and put your creativity into all of them. So
Yeah.
how do you function your life around all these different things?
This is what I'm trying to figure out right now, because and I'm trying out different things to help with creativity, because I find when you're in a bubble or in a pattern of consuming a lot of what's already out there, like you start to lose your original thought. Um, and I find when I don't know if I'm like coming across as I hate social media.
Listen,
I don't
I'm
know if
not
I'm
not,
coming across
not
that
going to
way.
cut you off, but social media is an amazing tool. It allows for connection, allows for expression. Like I said, it takes away gatekeepers, but there are also a lot of negatives to it. It's toxic. There's a lot of bad information that you can get consumed by, and it's not the whole story. And people always forget that, whether it's about a pandemic, whether it's about someone's life, you don't see the full story on social media. So I get it. I love it, and I also hate it.
I think when any type of technology is built, there, no matter what the intention is, there are also unintended consequences of it. And what I don't like is how it's turned into like this social approval kind of tool. And I feel like if you aren't intentional about using it the way that you need to, you can get sucked into like a lot of bad places. And I've been there. And so I've been thinking about, because I see all of the value points that you just mentioned. I'm like, yes, like a lot of the stuff that I do requires that I connect with community and I connect with people. And so social media offers that in ways that other mediums don't. But at the same time, I think kind of what's working for me right now is like using those social platforms. Like if I'm saying it's helping with a profession, that I'm using it as a professional, and that I'm not getting sucked into the algorithm and all that kind of stuff. Um, what helps with generating like creative ideas? I've started learning about deep work, and really like carving out time to just think honestly, where I don't have um all of these like noises and like chaos around me, where I'm able to just like sit down in my room or whatever place that I carve for thinking time, and just like let my mind wander, embrace boredom. Like that's one of the pillars of deep work, is to embrace boredom and not immediately, like at this point, we've, the way that he describes it. So Cal was talking about this, Cal Newport, and he was talking about how we've basically connected like boredom to stimulation. So anytime that you have a free avenue, like let's say you're waiting in line at a grocery store,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just standing in line and you're bored because you're just waiting for the individual to call you for your turn. And oftentimes people will pull out their phone and just like look at apps. Even if they're not doing anything on it, they'll just pull out their phone
Mm-hmm.
instead of just letting their mind wander. Or if you're at a restaurant, another example he shares is if you're at a restaurant and you're with a friend and they go to the washroom and you're sitting in the booth by yourself, you'll pull out your phone, or you're like immediately go to distract yourself. And he said these are great moments. It's not about being bored all of the time, but in these moments, it's about really disconnecting that, um, that knowing that we've developed in our brain of every time we have this moment of being in isolation or letting our brains wander or just being bored, that we immediately go to stimuli. And so for me, it's what I'm trying to do right now is create moments where I can concentrate for extended periods of time and not immediately go to, because it takes a lot. Like there's something called attention residue. And if you're constantly switching from different tasks, then you're not able to reach that flow state as often as you think, right? Like if you're producing at this level and then you're like, hey, I need to go check my email. And then you come back, you're producing at this level, and it takes a long time for you to get back to that optimal state. And I think that it was also hindering my ability to come up with new ideas and be creative and do things differently. And so I think it's a lot to juggle when you have different like moving parts and different things that you want to work on and contribute to. But maybe two things that have helped me are all of these things that I'm doing are not disjointed. They
Mm.
all they all support each other, and they all make the other thing stronger. And when I'm like working on the podcast, I'm developing skills that are also making me a better consultant, you know? And so all of these, in my head at least, these are all things that are working within each other. And yeah, I forgot the second thing that I was going to say, but that was the most important thing.
I feel a bit called out, honestly, by that.
Why?
By that. Oh, I'm bad at the multitask. Like even before this, like I just put out my other episode, and I'm also on my phone, and even at work, I'm like doing like a bunch of different tasks
Six
at
things
once.
at once.
And I almost never get that flow state. Whereas I
Ooh.
might think I am. So I'm glad you called me out indirectly, because now I'm like,
Wait, I didn't really call you out because he also talks about shallow work and deep work. And
ooh.
shallow work is not to say that it's not important, because you need to do all of these things. Like you don't always need to be in this flow state to keep your business going. Do you know what I mean? Like answering emails you can do while listening to music, um, posting on social media. You don't necessarily like that's not deep work, right? And so I think it's also asking yourself what like how much time am I using in both buckets,
Mm.
and also for if I'm trying to come up with new ideas, that is deep work, and you like don't distract yourself while you're trying to do that, because you're I don't know. I think the quality also of your ideas and what you're able to produce um, might be self-sabotaging. And like, I'm really talking to myself right now. I'm not trying to call you out, I'm talking to myself. But I think, you know, we need both. We need
Mm.
both. And I think with deep work, it's just about sustained concentration. So
Mm.
one thing that is helping me is literally, if you're going to use your phone for one thing, would be to put a timer on and say for the next 30 minutes, I'm going to work on my podcast strategy. And then if I check my phone or self interrupt, then I got to start the timer over again at 30 minutes.
Mm.
And so it's like building this, and then you can increase it as time goes on, right? Um, yeah, it's
Hmm.
powerful.
Very interesting stuff. I could probably talk to you for the next 6 hours, but I don't want to keep you forever. You I don't say this lightly. You're one of my favorite people I've started following, and you're just truly remarkable. And I love all the stuff you're doing. And I just think it's so great. So I'm really happy we could get this to work, and you to come on. Where do people find you? Where do they find the podcast, and to listen and to connect with all the awesome stuff you're doing?
Yeah, so you can find me. I have a website where I have all of the podcast episodes and things that I'm working on at naomihaile.com, NAOMIHAILE.com. And I'm sure you'll share different platforms. So I'm on social media, on Instagram and Twitter mainly. And then the podcast itself is called The Power of Why. So I'll send you all the links, and yeah, happy to connect with individuals on those platforms.
Amazing. Well, like I said, there's even had a bunch of stuff that we didn't even get to, and we still went over an hour. So truly amazing. Thank you so much. And I look forward to following your adventures along the way.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Where's my mouse? There it is.